According to Unaids, adolescent girls and young women are affected by HIV in high numbers. In 2017, Eastern and Southern Africa saw new infections of 10 to 19-year-old females. An estimated 50 adolescent girls die every day from AIDS-related illnesses, while 460 adolescent girls become infected with HIV. Joining us is Githuku Shongwe, who's Regional Director of Unaids, and Dr. Ntombifikile Mtshali, CEO of Shout It Out Now. A very good afternoon to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. Perhaps, Anne, let me start with you. I mean, just reading those numbers and the stats around young girls dying of AIDS-related illnesses is a matter that raises eyebrows. One would have thought in 2024 the stats would point differently. What is behind this?
Well, thank you so much. I think that the story is just a story of gender inequality. So the inequalities that have driven HIV amongst women and girls from the beginning have not changed. These are structural challenges. You know, it's poverty amongst women and girls. It's violence against women and girls. It's just being able to access the economic opportunities that they need to make alternative choices. And so many young girls are engaged in very high-risk transactional sexual relationships that they do very often for survival, for food, for, their boarding, for their families sometimes. And so a lot of the social norms that sort of persist in society just allow this continuation and persistence of these inequalities. It's just injustice for women and girls that is driving the numbers that we see. And it's all over this region. It's not unique to South Africa. We see it across Eastern Southern Africa, 4,000 girls infected every single week.
Dr. Mtshali, these numbers, Anne speaks about the rigid concepts of gender and how they disempower women and girls. What are your findings pointing to?
They're exactly the same. And I think when we talk about gender, the story of gender inequality and what we need to address that. And funny, I thought maybe Anne will mention this, but the UNAIDS report has said that if we continue with our current efforts, while a lot has been done, but if we continue with our current efforts, it's going to take us some centuries actually to get to full gender equity. And that should be alarming for us because, as you've mentioned, HIV incidence in particularly adolescent girls and young women, which is our key focus population as shouted now, is we know that some of it is entrenched by gender-based violence. There's a lot of intersectionality. We talk about it being mutually reinforcing epidemics, HIV along with GBV. So we've got to be able to think about what is the step before that. And part of it is just definitely dealing with the issues that make women vulnerable. And that is the gender inequality is at the core of it. So when we address some of these things, we've got to think about how we're keeping girls in school. How do we keep girls economically active? How do we keep girls or young women in employment so that they're not rendered vulnerable in society and therefore perpetuating these gender imbalances?
And where would you say gender disparities are commonly felt as we take a look at the different sectors of society?
I mean, gender inequalities are everywhere. They're in every single sector that we see because gender inequality is pervasive. What we see in the sector that we work in, which is in health in particular, but also education and justice, in these sectors, what we see is that gender inequality plays out throughout the life cycle of a woman. But one of the things that I think emerged, and I think this is what Dr. Ntombi was sharing just now, is after COVID, we saw in many of our countries a sudden surge in underage pregnancies. And those pregnancies went from 10 to 12, 13, 14-year-olds who were, impregnated by older men who are close to them, who are in their homes. We're seeing it everywhere. And I mean, I think the figures that we have are indicating that the one area where we have made good progress has been on education, particularly in primary education. But when it comes to secondary education, we're not seeing girls staying through school to the end of secondary school. So any distraction in terms of financial ability, the girls drop out of school and they immediately get trapped into this cycle of poverty that leads them to either teenage pregnancy or underage pregnancy or HIV. So we're seeing the pervasiveness of this. I mean, we can talk about gender inequality in multiple sectors. We know about gender pay gap. We know about gender inequality even in terms of access to economic opportunity. In our sector, I think one of the big messages of this particular International Women's Day is to invest in women, invest in girls so that we see real returns. We are working on a big initiative called the Education Plus across Africa. And we have data when we look at the investment case that investing $1 in a girl's education gives about a $10 return. So this is a real intervention that we could push and push on more, you know. We also see that when we build women's economic power so that they can pursue their own jobs or enterprises or control their own money, they've got bigger choices. So we've been working with building agency amongst women and girls, but then getting them to direct them into opportunity so that they can shift the outcomes of their lives. And really investing in women and girls is what we need to protect their health, to protect them from HIV. It is really as simple as that, that we just have to change the trajectory of their economic lives.
Absolutely. Dr. Mtshali, just looking at some of the big influences, especially looking at the role of media and entertainment when it comes to sparking important conversations about gender stereotypes. What stands out for you?
What stands out certainly for me is the Barbie movie that was with a blockbuster that came out last year. And what is interesting about that movie is that they talk about serious issues, but also make a flip so that we can understand the burdened role that women have to play, and also in balancing and also just impossible expectations that women, girl children, young women have to face and obstacles while they're navigating everything else. And I think that's quite important for me. And I think as a leader, a female leader, it's also because as Anne said, some of these things are pervasive in society. It's not just in the workplaces. It is in our communities. It's in all the spaces that we find ourselves. So really driving those conversations and really raising awareness about those subconscious biases that we expect. So it's okay for Ken to be the one who goes to work, etc., etc. However, if the roles become reversed and now suddenly Ken has to be the one that caters to, and I'm putting it in inverted commas, caters to Gloria, it becomes a different conversation. Now suddenly it's absurd, and so that's the culture and what that movie particularly did, and I think it helps us drive that conversation because people then take a step back and they start questioning their own subconscious biases.
And very lastly, Anne, you spoke quite a bit about investing in girls insofar as education is concerned. But on a cultural note, what sort of investment in education is needed to empower young girls, more so breaking away from gender stereotypes?
Well, actually, a lot of the investment needs to happen not in the girls alone. Part of it is investing in girls to build their own agency. And when we see girls' movements strong. Earlier, we were in a session with the Athena Network, who are a really powerful movement across Africa of young women who are standing up to claim their own space and their own voice. That's a very important investment in their movements. But we have to invest in those who are perpetrators of violence. And it's not huge investments, but it's about calling men to take their position. A few good men go out there and call out the other men who themselves are perpetrators of violence. When we have seen men engaged and taking their position and beginning to shift their own power and their own ability to protect young girls and changing the choices that they've been making, then we see a difference. We had a major program, and I was working with UN Women before, and we had this He for She taverns, working with men who are patrons of taverns and having them begin to change their choices in terms of violence and abuse of women and girls. with working with the traditional leaders, the church leaders, those who uphold the social norms that are pervasive, that really drive this gender inequality. So working with them also so that they take care of that business while young women and girls are building their power, are going to school, are seeking economic opportunity. But if they still have, predators, men who are going after them, and seeking transaction and abuse in relationships, then it becomes very, very complex. So as we do all the work around them, we just need men to take their position, and we need to invest in them, even if it means investing and advocating for them to just stand up and take their position and do the rightful thing that needs to get done in breaking the gender inequalities that we see persist.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And Githuku Shongwe, who's the Regional Director of Unaids, and Dr. Ntombifikile Mtshali, CEO of Shout It Out Now.